Very helpful that Dr. Hillwood got this thing straightened out. Okay, so here we go. Um, I'll show you this. The next part they deal with is a little bit about the adrenal medulla. Nothing big about that. I mean, the adrenal glands. It's from a nervous system perspective. It's more about the medulla. The endocrine portion is certainly the adrenal cortex and the three layers of it that are there that you kind of know generically about that are there. But the adrenal medulla, again, is really it arises embryologically from nervous system tissue, so you can see that what really leans to the consistent, analysis of that being part of the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, releases epinephrine, formerly called adrenaline, named for the gland, and norepinephrine. Okay, and again, their activities are slightly different. We can review that again if you look back at that chapter on the autonomic nervous system, as to what one's more peripheral, one's more central. Uh, so again, it's interesting that it sort of amplifies the effect of the sympathetic nervous system. In general, epinephrine effects are those that are listed for sympathetic, etc. Stimulation of the heart being the most important. So now we get more into generic sensory, and then we get into special sensory. So they start with they kind of work its way interestingly from the ones that we have many more of, obviously, than special sense per se. Okay, so sensation, receiving information, processing it, okay, shuttling it to the right place. Then again, the way they describe it here, organizing, assimilating, and interpreting it. So there's a lot of different ways that this is done. And again, terms that we have covered previously in the neurology component is extoreceptors and interoceptors. You get signals both from inside as well as from the outer environment, but your body is able to certainly distinguish them in general. Okay, there's a little less specific. I mean, I think the internal signals are a little more generic, if you will. It's it's like it's the idea of the stomach ache. It's just there's some type of problem going on inside. It's very hard to localize it, certainly at first until it gets more severe. So the different categories are important. You should know, I think, a little what I call a factoid, a little fact and a location where we typically see these. Mechanical receptors, effectively, they are a stretch receptor, and we use them all the time. They cite one, I didn't highlight it so much when we did skin and anatomy. It's called a Pacinian corpuscle. It's interesting in the way it's shaped. It looks like a little, like an onion you buy at the grocery store. It's true. Sort of concentrically arranged in layers. And it's the side note for that is vibration. It's a deep sensation. It's located within the dermis itself, deeper in the dermis, and vibration is what it is. It's one interestingly, in diabetes, it's one of the first things to go. Okay, the nerve ending becomes depolarized from the distortion, etc. Sends out. Again, these are graded potentials. Hair cells. We talked about those, particularly in the ear. Effectively, they're a mechanical receptor. So what they're doing is, by being embedded in membrane, when that membrane moves or is caused to move, those hair cells move. And that motion, being a mechanical process, opens up channels, as we covered, and we'll undoubtedly see it again here, to allow for a flow of certain electrolytes that, depending on the amount of flow and where it's located, etc., all that's going to basically trigger auditory signals to us. So the auditory hair cells, by definition, would be in the cochlea. Vestibular hair cells, and those are the ones we looked at a little bit. You might remember those things called, you had those otoliths when we looked at the anatomy of that membrane that covered those cells in the semicircular canals. They were like little calcium-like little studs that kind of held it in place that were there. They're a little bit different. Okay, it's more about gravitational forces, acceleration, deceleration that are there, and the ones that we don't think of but are so important when we get to GI in physiology, and a little bit, and we'll do it here, of course, but in GI, it's all about chemical and stretch receptors. Your gastrointestinal responds to differences in pH, certain chemicals, osmolar changes, and stretch. That stretch receptors are really what triggers peristalsis more than anything else. Something entering the bowel in whatever location will cause a series of actions, both chemically related in different areas, but particularly downstream mechanically to facilitate good old peristalsis, squeeze and push, squeeze and push. Okay. So I think we underestimate those. So and again, I go back to even when we see the questions at the end of any of these chapters, the ones you're looking at, and some of these questions that you get or in review materials, it's a lot. It boils down to these core concept things. I say it over and over again. Yeah, that's why I was lucky to. I'm a good generalist in that regard. I live by these 4 letters: KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Did you ever hear that expression?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody heard that expression.
Always like the 7 P's.
What?
7 P's?
Yeah. Like patient,
No.
prepared.
No, that's not it.
Which one?
Prior proper planning.
Prevents for.
Performance.
Yeah, it's a military thing too. Those that bleed us the least in battle perspire the most in practice.
That's a good one. Never heard that one.
Okay. It's like FUBAR. That's the origin of the word snafu. Situation normal AFU. Versus TARFU, things are really FU'd. And FUBAR, beyond all recognition. Did you ever hear those?
No, I actually started using that. Like, oh, that's FUBAR.
Oh my God. Did you guys? The guy, unfortunately, he's had a really awful life after Saving Private Ryan. Because he just had a brain aneurysm. That Tom Sizemore, and he's all messed up on drugs and alcohol. He's been in jail and all that. I mean, he's great in that movie. But that's where people first started hearing FUBAR, though it's been around for a long time in the military.
Okay.
See, I have an authority figure who reminds me of that. Oh, what's going on there? It's a cluster F, Dad. So, chemoreceptors all over the place. Pain products, various other chemical levels within the bloodstream, responding to particular chemicals. In our purposes for special senses, taste and olfaction are really chemical receptors. The autonomics have chemical receptors, and we'll get to that when we do like the cardiovascular and respiratory and pulmonary, the cardiovascular and pulmonary physiology with regard to pH, PCO2, and PO2. And it's interesting, okay, how that works out. In respiratory, the most significant factor is carbon dioxide levels. Okay, oxygen is not nearly as important as PCO2 and pH. So that's another one of those little ones. If we hopefully we'll get to it during the course, and I'm sure we should, but be able to be aware of those. Nociceptors are for pain. That's a definitional thing. Very simple. They're typically free nerve endings. Okay, it's really it's a chemoreceptor for any other way, shape, or form. Can be literally anywhere. Okay, it's depends on where they're located. So autonomically in the internal organs, dull, aching pain, as opposed to very distinctive areas of pain where you cut yourself or you stepped on something, you touched something that was hot. You know exactly where it is. If you get a splinter, you know exactly where it is. That type of thing. And referred pain, of course, is that idea of being able to effectively get internal pain, but in such visceral pain that is in such close proximity to certain anatomical locations, classically heart attack and the internal or medial aspect of your left arm, and other areas that you can look at. Heat receptors, changes in temperature all over the place. Interesting. The electromagnetic for us really from a MCAT perspective in humans, photoreceptors, which hopefully we'll get to today. But in other animals, I didn't know this because my animal-based knowledge might not a zoo person. Okay. Fish can detect electric fields with electrical receptors, and magnetoreceptors allow animals to sense, for navigate during migration. I thought that was interesting. I didn't know that stuff. We didn't have to have zoology or thing. That was like medical students came from all different kinds of majors. I think today we see them more coming from bio majors. That was one of the advantages I had in school, particularly as a chemistry major. They did not have, all they had to do was have like a year or a year and a half of calculus. Okay. And I had, 3 or 4 of that type. So as a chem major with all the complexity of things, doing the kind of stuff that you would do in more advanced physics, do quantum mechanics and thermo. I had those a half dozen. So I don't know if you have a background in that or not. Do you get some of that from doctors Baxter and Badger and Buxton? It's close. Like triple integrals and stuff like that. No, shaky.
Really,
Okay. See, that was one of those little edges because there was such, at that time in chemistry, we had to do a lot of math, and it was a lot of math and a lot of advanced calculus and some of whatever physics knowledge I had came from. So, I mean, and that maybe that's where we're a little lacking. Though it's interesting, most of our students, when I've gotten reports on how they did in the MCATs, they did well in the physics component. So I'm guessing that the math physics stuff is pretty well handled. But guys I went to school with had, I was like, oh my god, we're doing thermal. I don't know what to, it's like, oh, ridiculous. Okay, the encoding process. This is interesting too. Modality, the type of stimulus, the ones above, all those categories, okay, determines on which type of receptor. Location. There's a field, an array of these receptors. So localization typically on overlapping fields. The analogy they did is like a Venn diagram, one of those cloud diagrams where they intersect. Okay. So that's how your brain localizes it by where it's almost like thinking of where all those signals come to finally localize, where there's an extraordinarily rapid manner. Okay. So that's part of it. The intensity, again, intensity, frequency. Okay. The range of intensities detected by sensory receptors can be expanded, what they call range fractionation. Multiple groups of receptors with limited ranges can detect a wider range overall. So it's like we get, when we're visually, our cone cells being able to distinguish color, overlapping ranges to be able to give us this, this wide range of colors that you and I are able to see. All that, neat mixtures in the color wheel. Duration, this is interesting too. They have 2 types of receptors I did not know about, nor did I teach. Tonic and phasic receptors. Tonic receptors, action potential as long as the stimulus continues, except they undergo adaptation. We basically, continuous signals we adapt to routinely. Okay. So the frequency of the action potential decreases. These receptors are decreases as the stimulus continues. Phasic receptors only fire action potentials at the stimulus begins. Okay. And do not explicitly communicate the duration of stimulus. These receptors are important for changes. So it'll be a different phasic receptor that will fire. So it's like you hear one tone and then you hear a different tone. Think of it that way. So all of the ability of the adaptation, it's what we do all the time. It's like toning out that it's there all the time. The stupid ventilation that goes on, the fan, a noxious odor. We are able to filter these things out. Background noises that are there. So even though the intensity remains constant. And then they're talking about different smells and the odor molecules getting used to, re-triggered by different levels. So, I mean, I think again, it's a good example. Something you can smell something up when you open the door, now you get a bigger whiff of whatever's in there, so to speak. Okay. Nociceptors do not. So I always like exceptions. Do not adapt under any circumstances. We can try to ignore them, okay, but pain's a warning sign. So if you continue, it's like somebody being to intentionally walk into a burning area to try to rescue an animal or a child or something like that. I mean, you're combating, you're mentally combating the pain that's there, even though surely the pain still exists that are there. My affection for proprioceptors. Okay. Body and space and time, awareness of self. Okay. Kinesthetic is a nice word to use for it. Muscle spindles in each muscle. You can look in the textbook. They have really neat diagrams and illustrations of those things, about stretch receptors that are there, Golgi tendon apparatus, capsule receptors, all of those types of things are part of it. So it's that continuous idea of information coming from what our bodies are at any place in time. I mean, we still get that stuff. I mean, I know when the cat jumps into bed with me, the claws. He does tells you what my wife thinks. He goes, do a little dance, make a little look, get down tonight. That's why she's so much younger than I am. Gustation and olfaction, taste and smell, chemoreceptors intertwined. So a lot of our taste, and I said this when we did this in the lecture component, is part of smell. Smell is part of taste, taste is part of smell. When you have a stuffy nose, it's hard to taste things effectively. Okay? So taste buds are really the receptors. The only ones they're defining are the classic ones: sweet, sour, salt, bitter, okay, and the umami. And it's really specialized cells. Again, they use the onion analogy. And that's when you look at those microscopically, you see those little clefts that are kind of like hair cells. The hair cell is nothing more than a cellular extension with openings that expose the membrane and an abundance of receptors, and the nature of those receptors, what they respond to, how many of them are triggered, et cetera, is how we distinguish certain kinds of tastes. I mean, those are the major ones. We hear about receptors for heat. We hear about receptors for fat, that certain people have more, certain people have less. I mean, we all know people who can tolerate very, very highly, scorching hot stuff. We were talking about that before when you're using habaneros and ghost peppers, as opposed to some people who can't stand it at all. Some people, they got to have it ramped up to the upper levels
So
to do that.
with I get that more like that's capsaicin and everything.
Yeah,
levels.
Capsicum.
For temperature wise, I get those would probably be more not chemical. But how would those work? Because I know for me, I can eat stuff straight up an air fryer. Over this past weekend, I was eating fries that scalding hot.
Some people can. I don't understand how people can do that, but some can.
Oh, okay. Because my friends how are you eating these? And I'm like, oh, they're
it's super hot. Yeah, I'm. To me, it's the pizza that you put on. Roof of your mouth thing. None of that knife and fork stuff. I'm from the New York metropolitan area. We do the fold. Baby.
Oh, straight down the gullet. Yeah.
The fold, baby. You do that. You go into New York into a pizzeria.
Oh no, yeah.
Oh, you got a knife and fork out there. They're gonna stab you. So take the fork and.
I've been to New York many times. I don't doubt that.
Believe me. You can't do that. So.
What about bagels? Is there something with bagel? If you use fork and knife,
No one would even consider that.
Okay.
Are you kidding?
No, I don't. I just had a bagel over the weekend. I ate both of them with my hands. I like that salmon one.
I hear you.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's what I mean. Like I'm saying, like I didn't know if that would give me shot, shanked, or stabbed in the city.
No. Knife and fork people would look at you strangely.
Gotcha.
They might ask you to leave the restaurant. So it's anybody watch Curb Your Enthusiasm? I mean, that's what you would do. That would be something they do a Curb episode about. It's great, pretty strange. I mean, if he invented Seinfeld, well, more or less he inherited it. Nevertheless, moving on. So, in the so-called taste pores or taste tiers are really nothing difficult. Olfaction, we know about already. Olfactory bulbs, same thing. Dissolved. It's interesting because of where you should know where they go. Information about taste is transmitted by cranial nerves to an area of the brain, the temporal lobe. Well, I think it's possible spam again. Oh my God. From where the brain receives olfactory information. So it's, as you can see, okay, they're very, very much intertwined that are there. Olfactory bulbs, again, temporal lobe in the brain near the limbic system. And that was an important point I've always mentioned 1,000 times for memory and emotion, like certain smells. They've been using smells to try to work with amnesiacs for forever. Okay. There's smells tend to bring people out of almost out of, sometimes not even out of a state of shock. So, and interestingly, what we consider good or bad is very, very difficult to do. What some of us have adapted to over time. And pheromones are interesting. I don't think they'd ask you about them other than say that they're, you know, they've studied more apparently so based on what they're pointing here, communicating information on these, bees, ants, that it's almost like a group kind of dynamic. But we do hear about it sometimes in human. I don't know whether there's some sexual connotation. I don't know. I don't know that that's been studied enough for that to make that a valid MCAT question. The ear. You know all the anatomy. If you don't, certainly review it. Effectively, the external ear to me is nothing more than capturing the sound. The middle ear, again, the anatomical landmark that covers the external acoustic meatus, the bony landmark, is the tympanic membrane. Effectively, it's a mechanical receptor. And then it transmits and sort of amplifies would be a good word. Directs the sound would be another good word. The ossicles, the tiny bones, hammer, anvil, and stirrups, malleus, incus, and stapes. That should be easy to remember. Oval window, where it goes. Okay. And then that takes you into the internal ear. And of course, that's a double duty structure because we're dealing, it's not just auditory. Years ago, we called it the auditory nerve when I learned about it, way back when. Now we call it vestibulocochlear. So it's two nerves wrapped in one. Just like the sciatic nerve is not one nerve, but it's a common, the common fibular nerve and the tibial nerve. They're wrapped together that are there. So the cochlea is semicircular canals, and I always forget which one is utricle and which one is sacral. I think utricle is semicircular canals and sacral is cochlea, but don't quote me. Okay. So the semicircular canals with both of those structures balance. The round window, okay, is, to me, is really where the excessive pressure, where that sound wave has an exit point. And I guess some people are better at doing that than others. I never figured I could be to do like scuba diving or stuff like that. I mean, I go nuts on a plane when they're varying pressure. I just doesn't,
Really.
I'm not good with that. As a kid, I missed a ton of kindergarten with it. It was before they had myringotomies. So you ended up with multiple ear infections, and they took out your tonsils, which they did for everybody in my generation, which wasn't necessarily a good idea. I probably damaged an eardrum. I missed like a third of kindergarten.
Dang.
Yeah, hey.
I would get ear infections all the time because my ears wouldn't drain properly. But then, I don't know how I grew out of it, but I haven't had an ear infection for like 5 years.
You're going to love this. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this. This is our, there should be a picture. That was the high school. I'm doing this for a reason. Memorabilia. Here it is, in this picture. Thank you, Nancy. I am in this picture. Can you pick me up?
And I'm gonna say it's at the bottom left, but I'm trying. Let me get up there. Get up there. I'll see.
That's kindergarten.
Kindergarten. All right. So you have black hair.
No, I didn't have that much hair. Remember, I'm a geek. I'm a nerd.
Tell me you're not the one that's suit and tie in the back.
No, I was not the
Okay,
one in the suit and tie.
I want to say that's you, but I'm looking through.
Where's
It
you?
could
Which?
be. It could be. I think it's between this kid and.
No, you're losing.
I think it's far right.
Far
Bottom right.
You think this is
This.
it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm trying to the left.
What?
The one to the left of him.
That's a girl.
No. Bottom right, but one to the left.
This or this?
Bottom right.
Bottom right. No, not even close.
So we're on the left.
Bottom left?
Let's play hot or cold.
Hot or cold?
But
No, you have to
No, you
select.
can't.
this is neutral.
Right.
This is cold.
Okay,
Left.
Hot,
up.
but cold.
So it is the bottom left. That is you.
Here?
Yeah, that's you.
No, bow tie.
Right. Oh.
Oh, no, see that.
You're hiding.
You're
Let me go.
hiding.
Bow tie and suspenders.
Aw.
You wore a suit in kindergarten?
Bow tie and
You can't even
suspenders.
see, we can't even make out their face. I can't even see that.
Now, my favorite part of this picture, if you want to see how the world has changed, that was undoubtedly Easter parade.
They were still.
This is the first day. Notice Mrs. Cone. Notice what's in Mrs. Cone.
Look, your kindergarten teacher got this guy's a lot cooler than mine was. I'm just telling you.
What? No, this is the mom. They were on the first day of kindergarten, they were smoking a cigarette, bringing their kid into class.
Oh yeah.
Just want to let you know.
What was that photo? That photo, what? You were 1950. You said you were 18 and yeah.
In 1956.
69, so
September of 1956.
that is very lucky that you went to become a doctor because the nom was going on, and I understand you talked about. That.
The last I heard, this lady was 95. I talked to her son, who was a buddy of mine, back in 2019. So that's 3.5 years ago. She was 95 and still around. Because I asked, I said, how mom and dad, his dad had died, but his mom was still around. Okay, moving on. Sorry, Janelle.
I understand. We all appreciated that.
I'm so happy.
Did you just find that?
No, it's been there
Oh,
forever.
okay.
I just don't show it to any. I only show it to people who would appreciate it. You're
Appreciate it.
You
Wait,
gotta
so
show Haley.
you would wear suits in kindergarten, not suits, but you wore suspenders, a dress shirt, and a bow tie in kindergarten.
frequently.
I was wearing a Phineas and Ferb shirt, so like I'm not gonna judge. But
And that's public school, not that's public, not like parochial school.
was that parochial then? No.
For a Jewish kid,
Oh, that.
what was it St. Goldberg's?
Good point to understand.
Edward V. Walton. We were a Revolutionary War town. They had four national parks in the town.
Really?
2 were statues at churchyards. 1 was a church graveyard from pre-Revolutionary War, and 1 was called the Cannonball House, where they fought a very famous battle
Okay.
called the Battle of Springfield. Every state has a Springfield, but they're in New Jersey has 2. So we were in township of Springfield versus in South Jersey, Springfield Township. So yeah, I mean, so we had very, very, very proper. But everybody who lived there, we had 3 synagogues and 4 Catholic churches because everybody had emigrated from the inner city, and that was basically Italian and Jewish families. I honest to goodness, I didn't know that there was anybody other than Italian or Jewish people when I was a kid because everybody was, what's your dad do? Don't ask.
But
He had an Italian surname. Don't ask.
yeah, my grandma grew up in the Jewish part of town. She's not the Jewish, the Italian part of town, and they said they would throw all the stray animals for some reason in the Italian part of town. And my grandma said they did not like us very much, and I was like, I would never guess.
Moving
But that's
on.
how she got her first dog, and then got run over by a car. So.
Ooh. Okay, here we go. God, give me 5 minutes to finish this ear.
We'll do.
Semicircular canals, utricle and sacral, ear popping. Okay. So that's the pressure. That's that round window. The eustachian tube plays a role very importantly with that. Eustachian, auditory, pharyngotympanic, all the same tube. Remember, that's that remnant of the, you should know that. The pharyngeal pouches, those 3 things we have, as vertebrates have. And that's the remnant of it, and that's the pressure equalizer, particularly underwater. My first wife was a certified diver, so she was all into that stuff. I could never. So mechanism of hearing. Eardrums vibrate. The ossicles pass that on. The bones of the middle ear amplify it, direct it. Okay, the stapes contacts the oval window. Vibration in the oval window, the waves in the 2 structures, remember there's perilymph, and the ones that are intimately associated with the hearing and balance is called endolymph. The perilymph is more, doesn't have quite the electrolytic components and has a different consistency fluid-wise. And I don't know that that's important as to what the consistency is exact, but they're similar but distinctive. They're through air, next through bone, and then through the liquid. The endolymphs vibrate, and it's the basilar membrane through that coiled length of the cochlea, remember? The basilar membrane has the hair cells projecting, and what basically is they project it up, they contact the tectorial membrane. When the basilar membrane moves, the hair cells are being pulled like this, and they bend. That bending is what, I don't know that it's directly mechanical. It is a mechanical receptor, but effectively it opens ion channels. I think that's all you have to know, which results in the neurotransmitter release. So dendrites, okay, from bipolar auditory, remember you go from those cells effectively into bipolar cells that are stimulated by this neurotransmitter, and thus the sound is converted. So the bipolar cells are basically the transducing agent from mechanical to electrical energy, and where that is located along that snail shell-shaped cochleal structure does that. The basilar membrane hair cells are together known as this organ of Corti or spiral organ of Corti. Okay, and that's basically how sound, and they're not going to get into too much of a distinguishing. So pitch, the frequency of sound, is distinguished by which region are vibrate, different auditory neurons. So as you see, it's thicker near the oval window, thinner and floppier as you get to the apex, like if you pulled it all the way out. Low frequency, long wavelength sound stimulate hair cells at the apex farther away, while high pitched sounds nearer to the oval window. So I think that's important. High pitch, close to the oval window, low pitch at the end of it. I think that's an important distinguishing factor. And again, loudness is amplitude. So it's an amplitude is frequency. So how frequent the vibration are. Okay. So 2 ears allows us, it's adaptive function. Okay. Difference between the 2 ears. So you're going to obviously get more if something goes off by your right, but you'll get some on your left, and you'll be able to isolate that or localize that would be a better way to express it. And again, extremely adaptive. So if a sensory neuron leading from the ear to the brain fires, that's perceived as loudness or amplitude. Deafness can be either nerve deafness, where we have damage to the cochlear structure, or conduction deafness, where it might be from an infection in the bone or an obstruction or a blockage. Okay, and so that's an important thing. That's part of it. And then lastly, the vestibular complex, semicircular canals, utricle, and the sacula is part of it. I see. And the ampulla is the opening into it. Filled with endolymph like the cochlea, they detect motion. Their function is detect not sound, but rather rotational acceleration. So different neurons balance information to effectively, this is not so much, I mean, the higher order function can be able to tell if you're rotating or if you're out of balance or you're feeling, but that's not really where most of the information is. And so it monitors both static and acceleration as well as the rotational component. We'll leave it at that. All right. So we're good.